Hi everyone, happy Halloween! I am actually sitting in my local cemetery because actually I love it here. It's really old, or it's not really old, it's Victorian, but it's like one of the oldest sort of ones in the city. And it's I think like the second or third largest Victorian cemetery in the whole of the UK. It's basically parkland. And it's surrounded on all sides by just really chaotic streets, like the sort of busiest streets in the city. So it's like you sort of come through the gates and all of a sudden it's just like, oh. However, I was reading this book recently. It's like a graphic novel called, I think, Friends with Boys or something, where she goes in the cemetery and there's like a ghost there. It's like maybe changed my relationship with the cemetery slightly. So I come here on my lunch break. I'm gonna have a bit of lunch and have a bit of a chat about the novellas that I read for Halloween. The first novella that I read for my Halloween project was The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This one was actually pretty good. It's also a movie, I think. I haven't seen the movie, but it's like a black and white sort of classic type movie that loads of people are into. I think probably the movie has its own sort of cult following, apart from the book. This one is like a ghost story. It's like a Victorian ghost story, where this governess goes to this like rich man's house in the middle of nowhere to watch over his niece and nephew after their other governess has died. And the story's being told by a guy like in a really warm, toasty inn, sort of telling the story of his sister's governess. This happened to her. And so she goes to this guy's house and she's secretly in love with the guy. He's really handsome and she has all these weird sexual fantasies about him. These children, the day that she arrives, she's told in a letter that the boy, there's two kids, there's a girl and a boy, the boy can't come back to school because he's done something bad, but it doesn't say what it is. And she asks the maid woman of the house or whatever, and she just sort of mentions that sometimes he's bad, so that's a bit creepy. But then, over the course of getting to know them, she's like, they're the perfect kids. I'm so obsessively in love with these kids. Everything they do is amazing and brilliant and charming, and I love them so much. And then she's walking with them or whatever, and she sees this guy in a tower, and she's like, oh, who is that? Don't know. She asks the maid. She's describing him to the maid, and she's like, oh my god, that's the old valet. He's dead now. She sees him a couple more times, scares the crap out of her. And then she sees someone else. She sees the old governess, a woman by the lake or whatever, who's not really alive. She's also dead. But we don't really know how they died. And there's quite a lot of alluding to their behavior, the valet and the old governess, their behavior toward the kids, and they were too free with the kids. I think that's supposed to be some sort of sexual stuff as well. But because it's Victorian, they can't just come out and say. They've got to just infer things. So all these ghosts and all this creepiness or whatever, at the end of it, I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but at the end, you're left wondering, are the ghosts real and everyone can see them? Or is it just the governess has gone crazy? She's mad. She's hallucinating. She's acting irrational. She's just fully unhinged now. We don't know. It's sort of always left up in the air. And apparently Henry James said about it, he's what you see in the novel, or what you assume about it or infer about it or whatever, says more about you than about the book. And I was like, oh god. That's a bit telling, isn't it? I've seen all this sexual stuff. But anyway, in the end, there's a bug on me. In the end, I feel it was pretty good. I don't love a book that doesn't give me a solid ending where one thing definitely happens, but it's a good thinking one. It's good for a creepy Halloween story because, you wonder, ghosts, insanity. In the end, I really liked it. It was quite short, so that's always good. Oh my god, I just heard something. It's probably an animal. Ghosts don't even make noise, do they? Or it's probably a squirrel. But also, my kid is going to do this thing tonight. She and I are going to go to this museum, this open air museum called Fagan. And they've got loads of fun Halloween things to do. They sent through a map and a list of characters, and one of the characters is Grach Shribin or something like that. It's a Welsh ghost or whatever. I was like, What is that? Yeah, it's called the gravestones. It's that one. And I was like, of the ghosts on this page, you know, they all look terrifying, especially the one with the meat cleaver. But that one, don't know what that one is, so I googled it. It's related to this Kahuri thing, or whatever. A death portent, spectre, skeleton, ghostly spirit in Welsh mythology, a disembodied moaning voice that sounds before a person's death. Okay. So the next one I read on my list, I actually loved. This is the best one in the list of all of them. It's called Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. This one is basically about this like teenage girl and her parents. They've gone to stay at this camp in Northumberland with like an archaeology professor and his students in order to reenact how people lived, like sort of like Iron Age time, I guess, roughly. And they used to do like ritual sacrifices of children and stuff. And sort of the book does start out with like an actual sort of like this kid's about to sort of be sacrificed. But then it like quickly jumps to like roughly the 90s, like early 90s-ish, with this teenager and her parents and like the students of the archaeology professor. And they're all wearing like smocks and like really itchy shoes and like sleeping in straw beds and stuff like that, for like authenticity. But it sort of like quickly comes down to the fact that the dad of the teenager is a total shit. He's like the worst. He's like deluded. He's like demanding. He beats his kid and his wife. And sort of the freedom and the carefree, sort of just like easy happiness of the students, like the college students or the university students, is like a whole alien life to the teenage girl. She's like, her name is Sylvie, and she just like sees them and sees how they are and just thinks, God, I've never seen anything like this. Like my life could never be like this easy and carefree and I can just do whatever I want and be happy about whatever. And she sort of talks about how if she was to like get away from her father or whatever, what would she even do? Like she has no inkling of what steps one would take in order to be free of somebody else. So that's really grim. But in the end, like you do sort of hint to this idea that the reason the dad is so into this archaeology stuff and this like Iron Age community, like because he's sort of given up his holidays, he's like a bus driver. So while the students are like doing school, a family like Sylvie and the parents are actually on holiday. They've chosen to do this. The reason he's so into it is because he's like one of these horrible like Britain first type guys, like really like nationalist and like hates immigrants and immigrant stuff, and like, you know, he named his kid after like a some sort of like Anglo-Saxon god or something, or goddess, because he thinks like that's the true people who belong in England or whatever, and like he feels that his family is like, you know, the descendants of the true people from England, you know. So, like, as they're sort of going about doing all this stuff, you find out that the dad like beats them and he's really crappy to people, and it's about to take him over the edge that all these teenagers are there and they can just say and do whatever they want. He's about to lose his mind. But then, like, the dad and the archaeology professor start to really bond over like how fun it is to, you know, reenact things properly. And one of the things that they used to do in the Iron Age is they'd make like this ghost wall. They'd like fashion it together. They'd like weave in branches and trees and stuff and put like skulls on top of them and like bury children underneath them and stuff. So they start making this ghost wall, and they start like, you know, doing the ceremony, like drums and like screaming, you know, and all this crazy stuff, and everyone like really gets into it and gets carried away. But then it starts to go like a bit too far. They start to need a sacrifice, and that's when it gets dodgy. But the writing in this, the characters in this, like what happens in this, I absolutely love this one. This is my favorite of all of them, and it's my favorite in like quite a lot of them, I think. Yeah, Ghost Wall, definitely read that one. So the next one I think is probably not actually a novella, it's actually a short story. It was super, super short, but I just wanted to do it anyway because it's gonna be awesome, and it was. This one is Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Probably loads of people have read this anyway, like it's sort of like school required reading, isn't it? And I must have read it at some point in my schooling days. So this guy, he's a teacher, Ichabod Crane, and he's a bit silly. He's like a dandy. He's really poor and quite strict with his students, so no one really likes him, but he like likes fine things, and he's got like a really good imagination, so he always thinks of himself as like being grander than he is, or like having the ability to move up and be grander than he is. But because he's really poor and doesn't get paid a lot, he has to sort of stay with students throughout the town, so they sort of like take turns like doing room and board and stuff. So he like meets a lot of people, and he gets like a lot of ghost stories from various old women. So in this like tiny like New York town or whatever, there's this story of a guy, a Prussian like soldier on a horse with no head, and he runs around like he lost a cannon, hit his head and knocked it off in the Revolutionary War. So now every once in a while he just like rides around by the church where he's buried looking for his head. So he's in love with this really rich girl in the town. He wants her money. And because he's like basically deluded and has like an amazing imagination, he thinks it's possible. So he's invited to this party, and he goes there, and he dances with like people, stays really late. In the end, he's like jilted. She's like, go away, I'm not interested in you, obviously. So he like leaves really dejected, you know. He's on like a really slow, really old horse. He's like going slowly through town. And he starts to think about all the ghost stories, and his imagination starts to kick in the exact way that mine would do in a situation similar, like it's sort of doing now. I keep thinking of that Friends with Boys thing. Sort of like as he's going for home in the dark, he's getting scared. He's like, what? He's looking around. He's like trying to like calm himself down. He's like, don't be scared. But then all of a sudden, he sees the headless horseman, and like I won't say what happens, you know. But I thought that was quite good. Yeah, it's got like good elements of spookiness, but also like, you know, funny aspects. Ichabod Crane is like a sort of funny character, you know. I like the sleepy town sort of setting, you know, like Gilmore Girls. I really liked that one. That was quite good. Okay, so the last one I read was, I think, the first in like a 3-parter. Like there's 3 books to this one. It's called Witches of Lynchburg by Paul Cornell. So I didn't really know anything about this author, Paul Cornell, but apparently he writes like those Doctor Who books, you know, and like series type things and comic books and stuff. So he's like a sort of that kind of sci-fi type writer. It's in a town, it's like a normal smallish town in England. Sovo, which is like basically Tesco, it's like a massive grocery store chain, wants to open a store in their town, Lynchburg. And it sort of divided the town. Half the town are really against it, half the town are really for it. The guy, like the head of Sovo or whatever, he comes to town to sort of like make a case for why they should have it, and presents the plans. And there's this woman. There's something up with her, you don't really know what it is, but she's magical in some way. She sees the plans, she goes mental. She's like, what are you, crazy? You're gonna open the gates to the other worlds, you know, and then she leaves. So it turns out that there's 3 women in this town. There's that woman, the old woman. She's a bit of like the wise witch character. She's been a witch a while. There's also 2 young women who used to be best friends until one of them became a vicar, and the other one was taken away into fairyland by fairies and then came back a year later after having been missing for like a year, and was like telling people she'd seen fairies. So they were like, okay, we're going to put you in a special place now. And she was like put in an asylum or something for ages. And afterwards, she's really into witchcraft and stuff because she wants to understand it and like why it is that she thinks these various things happen. So they end up sort of like coming together in sort of a funny way, I guess, you know, to sort of stop Sovo, which is actually that head guy or whatever, is like a demon guy who wants to open up all the worlds, you know, by breaking down this town that sits as like the linchpin and like the wall between like the other world and like the normal world or whatever. The plot of it is really good, and I really like the idea of like behind it, but the actual book itself was just cliche as hell. Everything was a cliche. The fairies were a cliche, the witches were a cliche. Like it wasn't, you know, it wasn't written particularly well. The ending is like really like Deus Ex Machina. Is that it? Like it's sort of like rising and rising and rising, and then oh, magically this other thing came, and it's exactly what we needed to fix the whole problem, and everyone hugs. You know, it ended really crappy. Through the whole story was really crappy. Like it was crap. This book was bad. Basically, I'm just gonna come out and say this is like a 2-star read for me. This was not ideal, and I think maybe it's because I'm not really into like the kind of sci-fi that is like, you know, 20 different Doctor Who novels. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, it wasn't really interesting and it wasn't even scary. Right, well, happy Halloween, everyone. Hope you have a lovely day and evening. God, I just love how quiet it is. It's like really peaceful and lovely. I think I'm going to do quite a lot more novellas next month for Novellas in November. So if you're interested in seeing more novella videos, please subscribe. Anyway, have a lovely night.